Today I want to talk about something that I think is extremely important. Obviously, I only talk about subjects that I do think are extremely important. But for those of you who especially follow exopolitics, extraterrestrial disclosure, and are following the deeper conversations happening around the humanity's place in the galaxy, there is a narrative spreading very quickly like wildfire in the alternative community. And that narrative is being pushed heavily by people like Ismael Perez. Now, if you've watched any of his recent broadcasts lately, you've probably heard some version of the following story. There's a massive interstellar object called ThreeI Atlas in our solar system. Hundreds of civilizations are gathering around Jupiter. A galactic peace accord has been signed. Secret human space programs are now negotiating with star nations. And if humanity gets too close to triggering a global war, benevolent galactic forces will step in, disable our weapons, and reveal themselves to the world to usher in a golden new age. Now, I understand why this story is attractive. It's hopeful. It's dramatic. It feels like humanity is finally about to be rescued from the chaos that we see around us. But the more that you examine this narrative carefully, the more it begins to look less like disclosure and more like something else entirely. Propaganda. Not just any propaganda. What I believe we're looking at here is Galactic Federation propaganda. I don't know if he has handlers or what. Because when you compare what Ismael Perez is saying with the information that has already come out through other sources like the Swaruu material, the contradictions become impossible to ignore. So today, I want to break down this very carefully. Not emotionally, not with anger, but with logic. Because if we're going to navigate the truth about extraterrestrial involvement with Earth, we cannot afford to blindly accept every story that sounds inspiring. We have to analyze it. And once you analyze the narrative that Ismael Perez is presenting, a very clear pattern begins to emerge. A pattern that looks suspiciously like narrative management. The first red flag is the Galactic Savior story. Okay? Let's start with the emotional structure of the story itself. Listen carefully to how his narrative is presented. Humanity is on the brink of destruction. World governments are corrupt. The cabal is going to trigger a global war. But right before things get out of control, benevolent galactic forces intervene. They disable nuclear weapons, etc., etc. Let me go on a side tangent for a minute and talk about the nuclear weapons disarmament. This is one thing that Ismael says that I do agree with him on. I have a deep understanding of how the Galactic Federation operates, and they will not allow, or better said, they will not initiate a nuclear war. But all the other weapons, they're on the table. They're okay with that. Okay? It's just that these nuclear bombs damage other realities, not just ours. Although the Galactic Federation did not stop Nagasaki and Hiroshima, so I can't say for sure that they won't allow that again. Okay, back to the Savior narrative. Right before things get out of control, galactic forces intervene. They reveal themselves to humanity. They remove the corrupt leadership, and suddenly Earth becomes a peaceful galactic civilization. Now pause for a moment. This structure should sound very familiar. This is the classic Savior narrative. It's classic. Humanity cannot solve its own problems. Salvation must arise from above. In ancient religions, it was the angels. In modern spirituality, it became ascended masters. And now, in the exopolitical era, the Savior has been replaced with extraterrestrial fleets. But the structure of the story is exactly the same. And that's why the first reason why this narrative should make people extremely cautious. Because narratives that position an external authority as humanity's savior often serve a very specific psychological purpose. They condition people to accept that authority. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. Because the story that Ismael Perez is telling consistently frames the Galactic Federation as a benevolent guardian watching over Earth. According to this narrative, the Federation has been patiently observing humanity for thousands of years. They are protecting us. They are preventing nuclear war, although they didn't. They are guiding our evolution. And when the time is right, they will reveal themselves and help humanity transition into a higher level of civilization. Now, here is the problem. That narrative contradicts many of the things that have been described about the Federation by other sources. According to the Taygetan and the Urmah perspective, the Galactic Federation is not simply a group of benevolent cosmic guardians. It is a complex political organization with multiple factions and agendas. And more importantly, the Federation is already deeply involved in managing Earth. Earth is not some independent planet that the Federation occasionally checks on. It's under their oversight, which means the idea that fleets are waiting around Jupiter to intervene if humanity goes too far begins to look very strange. Because if the Federation had our best interests at heart and truly wanted peace on the planet, they would never allow the situation to reach that point in the first place. Think about that. Now let's talk about the centerpiece of the entire story, ThreeI Atlas. According to Ismael Perez, this object is not a comet or an astronomical body, okay? It is a massive command vessel. It supposedly belongs to humans from 200,000 years in the future. It's parked somewhere near Jupiter, and it is coordinating fleets from hundreds of civilizations. Now let's analyze this claim logically. Advanced starships do not behave like large drifting objects sitting inside planetary gravity wells for months at a time, okay? Highly advanced civilizations avoid deep gravitational wells whenever possible. Large vessels would operate from deep space positions or from hyperspace proximity where they are far harder to detect. Parking a giant ship near Jupiter like a science fiction command center does not match the behavior patterns described by advanced civilizations themselves. But the bigger issue is the time travel claim. According to this narrative, humans from 200,000 years in the future traveled back in time to preserve their timeline? That idea comes straight out of science fiction. According to the Swaruu material, time is not a single linear path that must be protected. Time is a perception created by consciousness moving through frequency stage. Future civilizations would not need to travel backward to protect their own timeline because timelines are not fixed structures that can collapse. So the entire premise of future humans returning to preserve history reflects a misunderstanding of how time actually works. All right, now we need to talk about Jupiter, because this is where the story that Ismael Perez is telling really begins to fall apart. According to his narrative, Jupiter has become the staging ground for a massive galactic operation. Okay? He talks about something called the Jupiter Command. All right, the Jupiter Command. He talks about fleets gathering around the planet. All right? He talks about the Galactic Federation coordinating activity there as if Jupiter were some kind of empty cosmic headquarters waiting for them to arrive. But there is a huge problem with that story. he never once mentions the main civilization that is already associated with the Jovian system according to Swaruu material. That is the Karistus. Now, if you studied the Taygetan information, you already know that Jupiter is not an empty gas giant. It's part of a populated and strategically important region of the solar system. And the Karistus are described as the one civilization that I know of that's connected to that region. That immediately changes the entire picture. Because if Jupiter is already associated with an established civilization, then the idea that hundreds of foreign fleets could simply gather there under the authority of the Galactic Federation without the civilization being involved at all becomes extremely unlikely. And I don't even know if the Karistus is a part of the Galactic Federation, so I don't know if that would even work. They like to keep to themselves. In any real political environment, local powers matter. Think about Earth. If massive foreign fleets suddenly gathered near the territory of a major nation, that nation would absolutely be involved in the situation. They would not simply disappear from the conversation. Yet in Perez's version of events, Jupiter is presented almost like an empty command platform for the Federation. The Karistus are never mentioned. Their role is never discussed. And they're the ones that claim that Earth is theirs anyway. So they should definitely be involved in the picture. That omission is very interesting and a huge red flag, because when a major element of a situation disappears from a narrative, it usually means one of two things. Either the person telling the story does not know the full picture, or they are intentionally leaving parts of it out. Now, let's think about what the presence of the Karistus actually implies. Since there is an established civilization associated with the Jovian system, then Jupiter is not just a convenient staging point for the Galactic Federation. It's someone else's region, which means any large-scale activity there would involve negotiation, coordination, or conflict with the civilizations already connected to that area. And that is exactly the kind of complexity that disappears from Perez's narrative. Instead, we get a simplified story where the Federation arrives, organizes fleets, and prepares to intervene in humanity's future as if they are the unquestioned authority of the solar system. But that idea becomes much harder to maintain when you consider that the solar system itself already contains civilizations with their own interests, territories, and alliances. Now, there's another issue with the way that this Jupiter story is told. And that's the concept of the Jupiter command itself. Listen to how it's described. A centralized authority, a command structure, fleets gathering under unified leadership. This language should sound very familiar because it mirrors the structure of human militaries. Admirals, command centers, fleet coordination, strategic headquarters. But Swaruu repeatedly explained that advanced civilizations rarely operate through rigid hierarchical command structures like the ones humans use. Their systems tend to be far more decentralized. Decisions are made through councils and agreements rather than through strict chains of command. So the idea that Jupiter hosts a massive centralized command authority directing fleets from hundreds of civilizations begins to look less like an accurate description of interstellar politics and more like a projection of human military thinking onto the cosmos. And once you start noticing these patterns, the entire story begins to look different. Instead of complexity and politically nuanced cosmic environment, we are presented with a simplified narrative where the Galactic Federation is the central authority organizing events in our solar system. But since the Karistus are part of the Jovian system, then that narrative immediately becomes incomplete, because the solar system would not simply be a stage for Federation operations. Exactly. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It'd be a region, though, with its own civilizations and its own political dynamics in this context. And those dynamics would matter, which brings us back to the bigger question. Why does Perez's narrative consistently portray the Galactic Federation as the unquestioned authority organizing events in our solar system? Why does it describe fleets gathering around Jupiter without acknowledging the civilizations associated with that region? Because stories shape perception, and the way a story is structured tells you a lot about the message it's trying to deliver. In this case, the message is clear. The Galactic Federation is the authority, they're watching over humanity, they're organizing events in our solar system, and when the time comes, they will guide the future of this planet. But when you start looking at the pieces that are missing from that story, including civilizations like the Karistus, the picture becomes much more complicated. And that complexity is exactly what disappears from simplified narratives. All right, now I want to ask you a question that almost nobody seems willing to ask when people like Ismael Perez start talking about the Galactic Federation like it is some perfect, benevolent guardian organization watching over humanity. If the Galactic Federation is so benevolent, then why did the Taygetans break away from them? Think about that for a moment. Why are civilizations breaking away from the Galactic Federation and separating themselves from them? Because according to the very same body of information that many people in the exopolitics community follow, civilizations like the Taygetans, the Urmah, and the Interians have all had serious conflicts with the Federation. And a lot of other races are waking up to the fact that the Galactic Federation has been too permissive with the suffering happening on Earth. The Galactic Federation propaganda is all over this quadrant of the galaxy, not just on Earth. And very trusting races are easily deceived, but they are waking up. And that raises a very serious question. If the Federation is truly the benevolent cosmic authority that people like Ismael Perez claim it is, why would advanced civilizations that have been part of the organization for thousands of years suddenly distance themselves from it? That alone should make you pause. Because organizations that are purely benevolent do not usually have member civilizations walking away from them. That kind of behavior looks much more like politics. Okay, so now we have the bigger question. If the Galactic Federation narrative that Ismael Perez is presenting contains these contradictions, then we have to ask something very important. Why promote that narrative in the first place? Okay? Because narratives are not just stories. Why consistently portray the Galactic Federation as humanity's benevolent guardian? Because narratives shape perception, and perception shapes consent. And if you want people to trust in authority, the first thing you do is create a story where that authority becomes their protector. You create a savior narrative. And if you look carefully at how the Federation is described in many of these presentations, that is exactly what's happening. So after looking at all this, I think the real message we should take away is actually very simple. Humanity does not need galactic saviors. Stop externalizing your power and consent. I know this might, be a disappointment to some people because the idea that advanced civilizations are watching over us and waiting for the perfect moment to rescue humanity from its own problems is a very comforting thought. And people swallow it. It's hook, line, and sinker. But comfort is not the same thing as truth. And if humanity is ever going to mature as a civilization, we have to stop looking for external authorities to solve our problems for us. If humanity ever becomes part of a wider galactic community, it should not happen because we were rescued. It should happen because we matured, because we learned to govern ourselves, because we learned to think critically, And because we refuse to surrender our future to anyone, no matter how powerful or advanced they may appear. So the next time you hear someone say that the Galactic Federation is preparing to save humanity, ask a simple question. Who benefits from that narrative? Because sometimes the most powerful form of control is not force. Sometimes it's a story. So, I think you guys have the whole picture. Okay? There's a lot to kind of go through here. I know you guys probably don't even watch Ismael Perez's stuff, but there are thousands and thousands of people that do. And those people are externalizing their power and sitting on their hands. And those are exactly the people that we need in order to change this planet. As long as they keep sitting on their hands, well, the wars are going to continue. They're going to continue. They're going to continue. They're going to go on and on and on. The wars are not going to stop after thousands and thousands of years. Okay, so I'm just trying to give you guys the cold, hard truth here. In my opinion, Israel is going to take over that entire area, and that is going to be a long process. They're going to take it all over, and they're going to rebuild everything with super advanced smart cities, 5G, 6G, whatever. Okay, so I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. I appreciate you guys watching. Support me on Patreon if you can, and have a great day. Thanks.